The email showed up at 3 in the morning. No subject line, no name. Just a small red seal, shaped like a cross with wings in the corner of the screen. At first, I thought it was spam. I get hundreds of strange messages from religious groups and history blogs. But this one felt different. There was weight behind it. Inside the message was one single sentence. They wrote, "For your experience in ancient civilizations, we request your presence at the site near the ancient city of Ur, southern Iraq." That was all. And a single file was attached. It was called God from the Archive. The name made me pause. It sounded like a bad joke, but curiosity has always been stronger than common sense. I opened it. The file contained 3 things: a satellite photo of the desert, a picture of a staircase carved into the sand, and a short, shaky video clip. In the video, someone held a flashlight over a stone tablet covered in strange markings. A voice whispered, "Do not speak the words of the old ones." Then the screen went black. No sender, no date, but the seal at the bottom of the frame was clear. It belonged to the Vatican secret archives. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the buzz of my old computer fan. The Vatican does not contact freelance archaeologists by email. That alone made my stomach twist. Still, I could not look away. The coordinates attached to the message were real. I checked them. They pointed straight to a patch of desert near the ancient city of Ur, where the Sumerians once built temples to their gods. The next day, another message arrived. It said, "You are authorized for immediate travel. Departure in 48 hours. Compensation has been arranged." No signature, no instructions, but everything else was correct. My name, Simon, my credentials, even my passport number. I told myself it was a scam. Yet, something about the first message kept echoing in my head. The last line said, "We need you because you do not believe in God." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I packed my bag. 2 nights later, I was sitting on a plane heading east. The cabin lights were dim. The hum of the engine sounded like a slow heartbeat. Outside the window, lightning flickered behind the clouds. I opened my laptop again, replaying the video frame by frame. The carvings on that tablet were older than anything I'd ever seen. They looked like cuneiform, but the pattern was wrong. Spirals instead of rows, symbols built inward like a trap. Halfway through the clip, the hand holding the flashlight started shaking. A reflection appeared on the stone, faint but visible. It looked like a face, long, narrow, eyes too large, not human. I closed the laptop and pressed my hands against my face. My pulse was pounding. I told myself the image was a glitch, some kind of visual distortion. But part of me knew better. Hours passed in silence. The air smelled like metal and recycled prayers. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that reflection again. The thing staring back from the stone. When the flight attendant's voice broke through the static, saying we were descending into Basra International, I realized I had not slept at all. Through the small window, I saw nothing but desert. The lights of the airport looked like dying stars scattered on black sand. When I stepped out, the heat hit like a wall. A soldier handed me a folder without a word and walked away. Inside was a sheet stamped with the Vatican seal. At the top it said, Project Ur 6. Below, 6 names. Mine was second. The first read, Father Connor. A convoy waited on the runway. 2 jeeps and a transport truck. A man stood beside them, dressed head to toe in black, a priest's collar at his neck. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, reflecting the headlights. He nodded once. No words. We drove for hours into the wasteland. The road vanished under the sand. The horizon was nothing but darkness pressing down on us. No one spoke. The only sounds were the grinding of the engine and the whisper of sand against the glass. When the truck finally stopped, I saw lights scattered across the dunes, Tents, generators, excavation gear. In the distance, a staircase of stone rose from the sand like a wound in the earth. Father Connor stepped out first. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked back at me. His voice was calm. "Welcome to the beginning." He turned and walked toward the pit, his black coat rippling in the wind. And that was when I understood something simple and terrible. The Vatican had not invited me to study the past. They had brought me here to watch it come back to life. The heat hit like a hammer when I stepped out of the truck. The night was supposed to be cold, but this heat did not fade. It clung to the skin, dry and electric, like something alive. Floodlights burned in the distance, drawing thin circles of light on the sand. Generators hummed behind canvas tents. I could smell dust, diesel, and the faint trace of burned incense. Father Connor walked ahead of me, silent, coat dragging through the sand. He did not look back. None of them did. The site stretched across a wide basin, a hollow in the desert shaped like a crater. At the center was the staircase I had seen in the photo. Stone steps carved straight into the earth, disappearing into darkness. Someone had built a fence around it, a square of steel posts and razor wire. A guard stood at each corner with rifles slung over their shoulders. They looked nervous, not the kind of nervous that comes from boredom, but the kind that comes from knowing something is wrong. A young man approached me from one of the tents, sunburned, wearing a dusty field jacket, eyes bright from too much caffeine. "Scott," he said, shaking my hand, "geologist. You must be the American." I nodded. "Simon?" He laughed softly, like the name meant something. "Good to have another one of us out here. You will see, this place feels wrong." He led me past the tents, pointing things out as we walked. Here was the communications tent. There, the power line to the generator. Farther back, a small chapel made from shipping crates stacked into a cross shape. Inside one of the larger tents, a woman sat surrounded by notebooks and tablets. She barely looked up when I entered. "Grace," she said, linguist. On her screen were dozens of images of the carvings from the stairwell. They were not symbols I recognized, too precise, too symmetrical. She said quietly, "Some of them repeat every 6 lines, like a pattern trying to correct itself." Father Connor entered a moment later. His voice was steady but carried authority. "Dinner in 10 minutes. No one works after dark." Scott leaned toward me and whispered, "That's one of the rules." I asked, "What happens after dark?" He shrugged. "Ask him. I'm just here for the rocks." We ate in silence that night. Canned food, warm water. The hum of the generator was the only sound. Connor sat at the end of the table, hands folded. Grace asked him about the markings on the tablet. He looked up slowly and said, "Some doors were not meant to be opened twice." No one spoke after that. Later, I walked outside. The sky was black and endless. Stars shimmered like dust on glass. The desert was too quiet, as if sound itself refused to move. I walked to the edge of the pit. The staircase below looked like a throat cut into the earth. Cool air rose from it, carrying a smell like old stone and wet metal. Something echoed down there. Not a sound. Not exactly. More like pressure against the ears, a low hum just at the edge of hearing. I stepped closer to the fence. The guard nearest to me whispered, "Do not lean over. It listens." I turned to him. "What?" But the man did not answer. He crossed himself and walked away. The hum faded. I told myself it was just vibration from the generators, but my hands would not stop shaking. Back inside the tent, I found Grace still awake, typing notes into her laptop. She asked, "Do you believe any of this is real?" I said, "I believe in what I can touch." She smiled without humor. "Then stay above ground." Before dawn, I woke to the sound of prayer. Soft voices, rhythmic, coming from the small chapel made of crates. Connor and another priest, younger, maybe in his 30s, Father Miguel. They knelt before a wooden cross lit by a single candle. I watched from the doorway. Miguel's voice trembled as he said, "They told me it moves when no one is there." Connor answered, "Faith is the only thing that keeps the ground still." I left before they saw me. Outside, the horizon was bleeding red with sunrise. Wind carried thin ribbons of sand through the camp. Scott was already at the excavation line, helmet tilted back, smoking. He waved me over and pointed toward the pit. "Look," he said, "that is not just rock. It is fused, melted, like it was burned from the inside out." I stared down at the steps again. Each one was carved with those same spiral symbols, the same repeating pattern Grace had shown me. They seemed to pulse when the sunlight hit them, as if the stone was breathing. Connor approached, holding a folded piece of paper. He looked at us one by one. "This morning," he said, "you will receive the rules." He handed each of us a copy and turned away. No explanation. On the page were 5 short lines, each written in black ink. The letters looked hand-drawn, uneven, almost desperate. Scott squinted at them and said, "This is serious? These are the Vatican's rules?" Connor did not answer. He just said, "Break one, and the ground will answer." He walked back toward the chapel, the paper fluttering in his hand. Grace stood beside me, eyes fixed on the pit. She whispered, "What happens if someone reads them out loud?" I told her, "Maybe we should not find out." The wind picked up again, sharp and dry. Somewhere below, a hollow echo rolled up through the stone steps, deep and slow, like the earth exhaling. Every hair on my arm stood on end, and for the first time since I arrived, I realized something I had not dared to admit. Whatever was buried under the ancient city of Ur was not asleep. It was waiting. The morning felt heavier than the others. No wind, no sound. Even the air seemed to wait. We stood outside the main tent, a small group of 6. Connor held a folder against his chest, his eyes shadowed under the brim of his hat. The sun hit his collar, turning the white band around his neck into a stripe of light. He spoke quietly, but every word carried through the camp. "You were each chosen because you can follow instructions," he said. "From this point on, that will be tested." He opened the folder and pulled out 5 thin pages. Each one looked old, the paper yellowed, the ink fading at the edges. He handed them out slowly, like they were sacred. Grace took hers first, then Scott, then me. The last 2 went to Miguel and Max, the security officer. Connor kept one for himself. We stood in a half circle, reading the same words. The heading said, "Rules of the Sanctum." Below that, 5 short lines, 5 rules. I read them once, then again. They were simple, too simple. Rule 1. Do not speak any of the inscriptions aloud. Rule 2. Do not shine white light on the altar at the center. Rule 3. Do not touch the carving with 6 wings. Rule 4. Do not remain underground during the hours of prayer. Rule 5. Do not record or take any footage after hearing the singing. I felt the back of my neck prickle as I read the last one. The wording was strange. Not if you hear the singing, but after, like it was guaranteed. Scott let out a quiet laugh. "You have to be kidding," he said. "This sounds like a campfire story." Connor did not react. He only said, "Mockery is the first way the enemy speaks." No one said another word. We were told to keep the rules with us at all times. Miguel slipped his copy into his Bible. Grace folded hers into her notebook. I placed mine inside my jacket pocket, the paper warm against my chest. By noon, we were allowed to enter the excavation. The guards unlocked the gate around the pit, and we descended the steps one by one. The light from above faded fast. Halfway down, the air changed, cooler, thicker, filled with the smell of old stone and burnt oil. The spiral carvings along the walls seemed to twist when the flashlights moved over them. I told myself it was just shadow. Grace whispered, "There are patterns between the symbols." Words hidden inside words. Connor's voice cut through the dark. "Do not read them aloud." Her flashlight trembled, and she nodded. The staircase ended at a wide chamber carved from black rock. At its center stood a flat stone slab, waist-high, covered in dust. The altar. Around it, the carvings were deeper, almost burned into the surface. Shapes of wings, eyes, circles, 6 of everything. Miguel crossed himself. Scott knelt beside the altar, brushing the surface with a gloved hand. "This is not cut by tools," he said. "It is melted, like glass." Connor moved to the far wall and placed a small wooden cross into a crack in the stone. He whispered something under his breath. The sound echoed, soft but endless, as if the chamber itself was repeating his words. I shined my flashlight across the carvings. The beam hit one of the wings. The stone shimmered faintly, almost breathing. Connor turned sharply. "Do not use white light," he said. "Switch to red." We changed the filters. Under the red glow, the symbols looked alive. Lines curved and shifted, forming shapes that disappeared when I blinked. Grace crouched near the far wall, tracing her fingers above a row of spirals. "They are not random," she said. "It is a form of recursion, like something trying to teach itself." Connor's voice rose. "Grace, do not read." She froze, then lowered her hand. I took a step closer to the altar. A groove ran along its edge, filled with sand so fine it looked like ash. I brushed some away and saw markings beneath it. Not Sumerian, not any script I knew. A circle made of intersecting lines like an eye. I felt dizzy. The air tasted metallic. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Scott broke the silence. "Rule 3, he said, pointing to the carving with 6 wings. "That one, right?" He reached out a hand, almost touching it. "Stop," I said. "Do not test him." He pulled back and smiled. "Just checking if anyone was paying attention." Connor stepped between us. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Do not test anything. Nothing here is sleeping." We stayed below for less than an hour, but it felt longer. When we climbed back to the surface, the sun was already low. The light bled red across the dunes. Everyone went silent during dinner, even Scott. Miguel muttered prayers under his breath. Grace stared at the copy of the rules on the table, her fingers tracing the edges. After a while, she said softly, "What happens if someone breaks one?" Connor answered without looking up. "The same thing that happened last time." No one asked what he meant. That night I could not sleep. The generator cut out around midnight. In the silence, I thought I heard something low and distant, a vibration more than a sound. It came from deep below the sand, pulsing slow and steady. I lay awake, counting each beat until it faded. 5 long pulses. Then nothing. And somewhere outside, a voice whispered, almost too quiet to be real. It said, "Rule 1. Morning rose dull and heavy. The sun hung low, red through a veil of dust. Nothing moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I sat outside my tent with a cup gone cold. The camp was half awake, caught between sleep and dread. Every face looked pale in the sandlight, eyes wide, waiting for something they could not name. Connor's voice carried across the silence, soft but sharp. "Below, now." We gathered at the pit. Heat shimmered above the dunes, but the air that drifted up from the staircase was cold. It smelled like rain trapped underground for centuries. We descended, step by step. The sound of our boots fell away until only breath remained. The chamber waited below, still as a tomb. The altar stood at the center, dusted with gray. But the dust had been touched. A single trail ran across it, like a finger dragged through ash. Connor stopped moving. The muscles in his jaw tightened. He did not ask who had done it. He already knew. Grace stood near the far wall, notebook pressed to her chest. Her eyes were glassy, fixed on the carvings that spiraled along the stone. Each line seemed deeper than before, as if carved from within. The air trembled. Somewhere far below, a low tone began to rise, not sound, not vibration, but pressure inside the lungs. I felt it crawl up my throat and settle behind my eyes. Connor whispered a prayer under his breath. The words came slow, measured, as if spoken to the walls themselves. The tone fell quiet, leaving only the pulse of our hearts. Then a thin beam of white light flickered across the altar. Scott's camera. A moment's mistake. The effect was instant. The carvings glowed beneath the beam, colors shifting from gray to black to a molten gold that pulsed like blood. The stone breathed. The chamber groaned. Air bent and folded on itself. Every light died at once. Darkness swallowed us whole. For a heartbeat there was nothing. No sound, no shape. Then something moved. A presence filled the space between us, tall and close. The darkness changed weight, pressing against my ribs. When the emergency lights flared back, it stood near the far wall, human in outline, but wrong in every detail. Skin stretched thin, eyes hollow, mouth open too wide. No breath, only that tone again, low, endless, shaking dust from the ceiling. Miguel fell to his knees, hands over his ears. Connor reached for him but stopped halfway, frozen by the sound. The figure turned its head. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if the air itself resisted. Its gaze swept across us and lingered on the altar. Then it faded, folding into the stone like smoke into cloth. Silence returned. Red light blinked weakly through the chamber. The altar stood cold again. Connor's voice broke the stillness. "Rule 2, broken!" We left without orders. The climb up the stairs felt endless. Each step carried the weight of something unseen pressing back. At the surface, sunlight looked pale, drained of heat. Scott threw his broken camera into the sand. Miguel wandered toward the chapel, whispering. Grace sat apart, her notebook on her knees, fingers tracing its spine again and again. I watched her for a long time. She did not turn the pages. She only stared at the cover, lips moving without sound. Whatever she heard, it was not silence. Night crept fast. The horizon swallowed the last line of light, and the camp dimmed to the color of rust. No one spoke during dinner. Connor prayed alone at the edge of the fire. I tried to write, but could not. The words slipped away as soon as they reached the page. The ground hummed faintly under the chair, a slow pulse counting time. Sometime after midnight, I stepped outside. The dunes glimmered under a thin moon. Wind whispered along the fences, carrying a rhythm that almost sounded like breath. Then I saw her, Grace. She was walking toward the pit, barefoot, her lantern dim and red. Sand curled around her ankles, but left no footprints. She stopped at the fence and lifted the notebook to her chest. The wind rose, fierce and sudden. The floodlights flickered, coughing pale flashes across the camp. I called her name, but the sound died before reaching her. She opened the notebook. The pages fluttered as if something beneath them was breathing. Her lips parted. No voice, only the Dessart answering back, a deep, hollow echo rolling through the ground. The tents shivered, the sand lifted. Then silence fell again. When I reached the fence, the lantern lay on its side, still glowing. The notebook rested beside it. The pages were blank, edges burned black, no footprints, no sign of her. Connor appeared beside me, his face gray with dust. He looked down at the notebook for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. Rule 1. Broken. The desert did not wake with the sun that morning. It stayed gray, as if the light refused to reach us. Sand hung in the air like ash. Every sound from the camp came slow, muffled, as though the world had been covered by a veil. Grace was gone. Her tent still stood, flap half open, notebook missing. Inside, the lantern lay cold. The imprint of her body on the cot was still warm when I touched it. Connor ordered no search. He only said, "The desert keeps what it is owed." Then he walked to the chapel and shut the door. No one spoke after that. Miguel prayed until his lips bled. Scott sat beside the generator, staring at nothing. A cigarette burned to the filter between his fingers. Max cleaned his rifle in silence. The sound of metal scraping metal was steady, almost ritual. I tried to work. It was useless. Every note I wrote turned into a tremor of the hand. I could not draw the symbols correctly anymore. They twisted each time I looked away, curling into the shape of 6. By noon, the wind changed. A current came from the pit, faint but constant, pulling toward the staircase like a breath drawn in reverse. The fence rattled. The tents leaned inward. The air smelled of wet stone and copper. Connor emerged from the chapel. He carried a wooden box sealed with wax. He said the Vatican had prepared it for the inevitable. He placed it near the edge of the pit and began to chant. The words were low, not Latin, not any tongue I knew. Each syllable felt like a nail driven into air. Miguel joined him, voice cracking, tears running down his face. The sound grew louder, layers folding over one another until the wind fell still again. When the chant stopped, the box shuddered once and went quiet. That night the sandstorms began. The sky closed like a lid. Lightning crawled along the horizon, silent but bright enough to turn the dunes white. I lay awake, counting the flashes. Somewhere between them, I heard something moving near the pit. Not wind, not an animal, a rhythm. Soft, uneven, dragging across stone. I stepped outside. The air burned my throat. Each breath felt too heavy to finish. At the edge of the camp stood a figure. She was facing away, hair whipping in the wind, clothes covered in dust. For a moment I thought it was one of the guards. Then she turned. Grace. Her eyes were open but pale, filmed with light from within. She looked at me, and the sand around her feet began to spiral inward. Her mouth moved, but no voice came. The sound came from everywhere else. It was the same tone we had heard in the chamber, low, endless, alive. The tents trembled. Generators coughed and died. The wind pushed outward in a single burst, flattening everything. She stepped forward. Her skin had changed, too smooth, almost glass. The air around her shimmered. When she blinked, the light inside her eyes pulsed with the same rhythm as the ground. I could not move. The pulse pressed against my chest, syncing with my heartbeat until I could not tell which was mine. The world narrowed to her face and the noise filling the dark. She stopped a few feet away. Something hung in her hand, her notebook. Pages blackened but whole again. She opened it slowly, showing the first page. The spiral symbol glowed faintly, lines crawling outward like veins. Her voice came at last, soft and wrong, layered with another beneath it. Do you see now? I tried to speak, but no sound left my throat. Behind her, the sand lifted in waves, forming shapes that almost looked human. They flickered and fell, rising again, each time closer. Connor appeared beside me. His face was gray, eyes hollow. He held a cross in one hand and the sealed box in the other. He whispered, "Back inside." The wind howled once, deafening. Grace turned her head toward him. For a moment, her face split with light, 6 wings of flame unfolding from her back, each one made of dust and fire. Then it vanished. She was gone. The storm stopped as quickly as it began. Silence dropped over the camp like a shroud. Connor stood motionless, still holding the box. He said nothing, only pressed it into my hands. The wax had melted from the heat. He looked at me and whispered, "When she calls again, you must not answer." I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but his eyes told me not to. He turned away and walked toward the chapel. Inside, the single candle burned low. When I looked again, he was gone. The night stretched on without sound. I sat beside the pit until dawn, the box on my lap, the sand still trembling beneath my feet. Every so often, a faint hum rose from below, matching the rhythm of my heart. It did not stop. It only waited. And I began to wonder if Grace had truly vanished, or if she had simply gone back to where she had always belonged. The desert forgot the sound of day. Gray sky. Gray light. No shadow anywhere. By dusk, half the camp had stopped speaking. They moved slow, automatic, as if sleepwalking through ritual. Miguel whispered prayers that had no words left. Scott sat near the generator, eyes hollow, cigarette burned down between his fingers until ash touched his skin. He did not notice. Connor had not left the chapel since morning. Through the thin walls a murmur drifted, a rhythm that matched the pulse of the wind. I did not want to know if he was praying or listening. The sealed box stayed beside me. Every few minutes it trembled, not a vibration, a breath. When the sun fell, the air turned sharp and metallic. The dunes shimmered faintly, as if light moved beneath them instead of above. Max patrolled the fence line, rifle tight in his hands, the barrel always pointed at the ground. He refused to look at the pit. Dinner was silent. The food tasted like dust. No one mentioned Grace. No one mentioned the voice. The generator hummed, lights flickering with each gust of wind. Afterward, I sat alone, watching the horizon vanish. The smell of rain lingered though the sky was clear. Far away, thunder flashed with no sound. Somewhere near the chapel, a door creaked open. Connor stepped out. His face looked thinner, eyes sunk deep into dark hollows. He carried a lantern that barely gave light. He walked toward me, slow and deliberate, and stopped just outside the circle of glow. He said only one thing. "Keep the box closed." Then he turned and disappeared into the dark. The chapel door shut behind him, sealing the light inside. I tried to stay awake, but the night pressed down heavy. The generator faltered. When the air turned colder, almost wet. Each breath came with a taste of stone. When I opened my eyes again, the camp was darker than before. No wind, no movement, only the faint buzz of the light over the pit. Max stood near the fence, his head tilted, listening. The rifle hung loose in his hand. I called to him, but he did not move. Something carried through the air, then, faint at first, almost too soft to notice, a hum, steady and low. It rose from beneath the sand, spreading through the ground like heat through metal. I felt it in my teeth, in my chest. Each beat matched the rhythm of my heart, until I could not tell which was which. Max started walking, straight toward the pit. He did not look down, did not hesitate. The rifle slipped from his grip and fell soundless into the sand. I ran to him shouting, but the sound fell flat. The hum swallowed everything. He reached the fence, his hands pressed against the wire. For a moment he stood still, then the lights flared white. I saw his face, eyes wide, mouth open, body rigid. The light turned red, washing the world in color like blood through water. The air split with a noise that was not thunder, not voice, something in between. It came from under the earth, rolling up the staircase in waves. The hum stopped. The lights died. Silence. When they came back, Max was gone. Only his rifle remained, barrel half buried in sand. The metal was warm. I backed away until my legs hit the crate. The box trembled again, harder this time. The wax seal cracked. A thin line of light leaked from beneath the lid, pulsing to the same rhythm that had filled the air seconds before. I covered it with my hands. The warmth seeped into my palms, alive and moving. I wanted to throw it away, bury it, but something in me refused. It felt like holding a heartbeat. Miguel came running from the chapel, eyes wild, hair clinging to his forehead. He was screaming words I could not understand, not prayers, names. He fell to his knees in the sand and started digging with his bare hands, whispering to the ground. Each word made the dunes shiver. I tried to pull him back, but the sand moved faster than he did. It folded around his arms, up to the shoulders. He did not fight. He only looked up at me once, smiling through tears. Then he was gone. The ground settled, smooth as glass. The box in my hands pulsed harder. The light inside grew brighter until it pushed through my fingers. I could see shapes moving within it, wings, eyes. fragments of something vast trying to fit inside a cage too small. I dropped it. The light vanished. The desert fell quiet again. Connor's voice broke the silence from somewhere behind me. Low, calm. Faith will not save us now. He walked past, carrying the wooden cross from the chapel. He placed it beside the empty fence and whispered into the sand. The wind picked up, scattering grains against our faces like ash. He turned to me. The second night has begun, he said. Then he walked toward the pit, disappearing into the dark. I stayed where I was, the broken seal lying between us, the faint sound of something breathing beneath the dunes. Each exhale came slower than the one before, and I realized the desert was no longer asleep. It was listening. No sunrise, only light leaking through a sky the shade of bone. The desert smelled like wet dust and iron. I woke to silence that felt heavier than sound. The camp was empty. Tents stood open, their walls flapping weakly in the stale air. The generator had stopped. Every wire hung loose, cut clean as if by glass. Only the chapel still held its shape. Smoke drifted through a crack in its roof, twisting upward, gray against gray. Inside, Connor was kneeling before the altar he had built from crates and canvas. He did not move when I entered. The cross lay beside him, half buried in sand that had blown through the doorway. Wax from last night's candle had spilled across the floor, hardened into a thin white map of rivers. He spoke without looking up. The desert has taken two, he said. Faith demands the third. His voice sounded hollow, worn thin by something older than exhaustion. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words stayed behind my teeth. Miguel's Bible lay open near the wall. Every page blackened, the ink soaked through. In the center of one page was the mark I had seen carved into the stone below. 6 wings wrapped around a single eye. The paper still smoked. I stepped back outside. The wind had picked up again, pulling lines in the sand like veins in skin. Far off, the dunes moved in a pattern that looked deliberate, almost circular, as if something beneath them turned slowly in its sleep. Scott sat near the excavation pit, knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on the horizon. He did not look at me when I approached. His voice was raw when he spoke. There were footsteps around my tent last night. He pointed at the sand. There, but none leaving. The footprints led toward the pit, 6 of them. Perfectly formed, pressed deep, too symmetrical to be human. Scott's hands shook. He whispered, "She came back." Before I could stop him, he stood and walked to the fence. He stared down into the dark throat of the stairway. The air above it shimmered like heat, though the day was cold. He said something under his breath. A name. Then he stepped through the gate. The sand gave way beneath his feet, swallowing him to the waist before he could move again. He did not scream. He only laughed once, a sound sharp and bright, and sank. The sand closed over him like water. I ran forward, but the ground was solid again. No hole, no trace. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Even the wind stopped. The whole desert seemed to pause, listening. Connor appeared beside me, face blank, lips moving in a prayer too quiet to hear. He held a metal canister in one hand, holy oil maybe, and began to draw a cross in the sand, but the lines would not hold. The wind erased them as fast as he made them. He looked up at me. "There is no grace here," he said, "only memory." I wanted to argue, to ask what he was trying to do, but his eyes stopped me. There was nothing human left in them, only reflection, like light on water. He stood, clutching the canister to his chest, and walked toward the chapel again. I followed at a distance. The air grew thick, heavy with heat that had no source. Inside, the candle had lit itself. The flame burned blue. Connor knelt before it and opened the canister. The smell hit first, bitter, metallic. He poured the liquid over the floor, across the cross, over his hands. Then he began to speak, not to me, not to anyone living. The words were old, older than scripture, slow and broken, each syllable pulled from his lungs like thread. The wind outside roared. The walls of the chapel shuddered. I tried to move toward him, but the air turned solid, pressing me back. Connor looked over his shoulder once, eyes bright with firelight. "For them," he whispered. He struck a match. The flame took him before he could fall. It climbed fast, white and silent, filling the chapel with a light too bright to watch. No smoke, only heat. The cross melted. The walls peeled away. When it was done, there was nothing left but sand and a faint imprint of wings scorched into the ground. I stumbled outside, the smell of ash clinging to my clothes. The wind had stopped again. The desert lay flat, lifeless, under a sky the color of dying steel. Miguel's voice drifted from somewhere behind me, a whisper carried by the air. I turned, but there was no one there, only footprints leading from the chapel toward the pit. The same six-winged pattern burned into the surface of the dunes. The box I had kept beside my cot was gone. In its place was a mark in the sand, shallow but precise, drawn like an open eye. From its center came a thin, steady hum, faint but rising. The sound felt familiar. It matched the rhythm of my pulse. I pressed my hand to the mark. The sand was warm. Beneath it, something moved, slow, deliberate, like a creature breathing in its sleep. The wind shifted again, carrying a single word through the air. It sounded like my name, stretched thin until it broke. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt the weight of faith return, not as comfort, but as gravity pulling everything down. The sky dimmed long before evening. A slow eclipse spread across the desert, not from cloud or dust, but from something deeper, like the light itself was retreating. The sand lost its color. Every tent, every tool, every shadow turned the same shade of gray. The wind had stopped breathing. Only the hum remained, low, patient, pulsing from below, the rhythm too precise to be natural. I walked through the empty camp. The chapel was gone, burned down to a circle of scorched sand. Connor's cross lay twisted in the ash, half melted, its shape unrecognizable. Beyond it, the pit waited, open and silent, the edges smooth as glass. There were no footprints anymore. The ground was hard, almost fused. Only one mark remained, 6 arcs carved deep into the slope, spreading outward from the center like wings frozen mid-beat. I heard movement behind me, not steps, a sound like fabric dragging over stone. When I turned, she was standing at the edge of the camp. Grace. Her body was whole, but wrong. Her skin held the dull glow of stone after lightning. Her hair drifted though there was no wind. Every motion came slow, as if gravity no longer decided what she should be. Her eyes met mine. They reflected nothing. Inside them was depth, not color, not life, only distance, endless and heavy. I took a step forward. The ground shifted under my feet, a pulse traveling outward from where she stood. It rolled beneath the tents, lifting the sand into brief waves before sinking again. She did not speak. She didn't need to. The air around her vibrated with sound, layered tones weaving through one another, a choir of whispers without mouths. Each note carried something familiar, almost human, almost prayer. My ears rang until I could not tell if I was hearing or remembering. She raised one hand, palm up. In it lay the notebook. The cover was blackened, edges curled, yet intact. She opened it slowly. The pages shimmered, the ink alive, rearranging itself as she turned them. On the final page, the spiral returned, endless lines folding into themselves. In its center, an eye blinked once. The hum deepened. The air thickened with heat. The dunes around the pit began to sink, collapsing in slow motion, as if the world exhaled. Beneath the sound came something else, A heartbeat, ancient and deliberate. It moved through the sand, through my bones. Every pulse drew me closer to her. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted. Ah! Each breath tasted like metal and rain. Grace tilted her head. When her lips parted, the words came not from her mouth, but from the air between us. They formed inside the noise, sentences without language. I felt them instead of hearing them. We were here before belief. You built your heaven from our remains. Faith is the shadow of memory. The sound struck deeper than voice, inside the skull, behind the eyes, resonating where thought should be. I tried to speak, but the hum swallowed my breath. The ground beneath her began to crack. Light seeped through, red at first, then gold, then white, so bright it burned without heat. Shapes moved in that light, bodies vast and formless, wings overlapping, eyes turning inward, each one reflecting the next. The dunes trembled, the sky opened, clouds spiraled outward, revealing a darkness that moved like water. Grace stepped toward me, crossing the space without touching the ground. The hum rose to a single tone, sharp, beautiful, terrible. My knees buckled. She stopped an arm's length away. Her skin flickered between flesh and stone, human and something older. When she spoke again, her voice broke into two, one above, one beneath. "Simon," it said, "you saw, you believed." I whispered, "What are you?" The words fell apart in my mouth. Her eyes brightened, and for a heartbeat I saw what she truly was. Not a woman, not even a god, a reflection of everything worship had ever feared, something that lived before names. The light behind her widened, swallowing the horizon. The wind returned, screaming across the camp, tearing through the tents, throwing sand into spirals that reached the sky. She lifted the notebook once more. The pages turned by themselves, faster and faster, until they blurred into a circle of motion. The spiral carved into the final sheet began to spin, glowing brighter with each turn. It was not ink anymore. It was an opening. From within a voice came, thousands layered, chanting without breath. The sound filled the air, the ground, my blood. It was not anger or mercy. It was recognition. The dunes collapsed inward. The pit widened, swallowing what remained of the camp. For a moment, Grace's figure blurred into the light, wings unfurling, eyes blooming across her skin. Then she was gone. Silence. The kind that follows creation or ends it. I stood at the edge of the new hollow where the excavation had been. Beneath me, light still flickered deep in the sand, slow and rhythmic, a pulse that refused to die. The notebook lay half buried near my feet. The cover was cold now. When I touched it, the hum stopped. The desert held its breath again. Only the wind remained, whispering over the dunes, shaping the sand into the faint outline of 6 wings. I looked to the horizon, where the sky met the earth. There was no line anymore, only motion, quiet and endless. And in that blur between heaven and dust, I understood what Connor had feared. The Anunnaki had never left. They had only waited for us to remember. The wind did not return after she vanished. It left behind a silence that seemed to stretch across the horizon. The dunes were smooth again, flawless, as if nothing had ever been built there. Only the faint mark of 6 wings lingered in the sand, a memory burned into the skin of the earth. I do not know how long I stood there. The light never changed. It stayed pale, suspended, refusing to fade or grow. Time had lost its direction. The hum beneath the ground had stopped, but the memory of it still echoed inside my chest. Every heartbeat felt borrowed. Every breath felt like it belonged to something else. The box lay near the edge of the pit, half buried. The wax was gone. The wood had darkened to the color of dried blood. When I lifted it, it was warm, pulsing faintly in my hands like a second heart. I thought of Connor, of his words, keep it closed, but the seal had already broken. The choice was gone. The air above the pit shimmered, bending the light. Below, A faint glow pulsed from the staircase, deep red, almost alive. Something was still breathing down there. I should have run. Instead, I started down. Each step sank deeper than the one before. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of dust and burnt oil. The walls pulsed faintly with light trapped beneath the stone, a slow heartbeat that matched my own. When I reached the chamber, the altar waited as before. But the carvings had changed. The spirals were gone. In their place were figures, wings, eyes, faces pressed into the rock, half-formed and shifting. Connor stood at the center. His back was to me. He was not praying. He was listening. The light from the altar cast his shadow across the walls, and in that shadow, he did not look human. Something else moved beneath his skin, stretching and folding as if trying to surface. I called his name. He did not turn. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. "You should not have come." I said nothing. He raised one hand, palm open. It glowed faintly, lines of light running up his arm like veins filled with fire. "They showed me," he said, "the truth buried before belief. The ones we called gods were not gods. They were the silence before creation." The air trembled. The carvings on the walls began to move, the figures shifting, opening eyes that had been closed for millennia. Connor looked back at me then. His eyes were gone. Only light remained, burning softly from the sockets. He smiled. "They do not need faith anymore. They only need memory." The chamber shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. The altar cracked open down the middle, revealing light beneath it, white and cold. A sound rose with it, not a hum this time, but a chorus. Voices layered upon voices, too many to count. Each one whispered the same rhythm, the same word that was not a word. Connor stepped into the light. The glow climbed his body, wrapping around him like water. His skin turned to glass. Inside, I saw wings unfolding, 6 of them, each made of fire and shadow. He spread his arms, and the light spread with him. The walls began to melt. The carvings dissolved into streams of gold that flowed toward the altar. Every figure, every eye, every symbol, all of it drawn into the center where Connor stood. He looked at me once more. "Do not run," he said. "This is how it ends. This is how it begins." The floor cracked open beneath him. Light erupted upward, swallowing everything in the chamber. I fell back blinded, the box slipping from my hands. It shattered against the stone, spilling darkness that moved like smoke, curling upward into the light, merging with it. The sound was unbearable, not loud, but deep, shaking the bones of the world. It filled the space inside my head until thought itself broke apart. When it stopped, the light vanished. The chamber was empty, the altar gone. Only a hollow remained, smooth and cold, as if carved by the passing of something immense. Connor was nowhere, no trace, no ash, only the faint scent of iron and the echo of his last breath still circling the air. I stood in that silence, the kind that follows revelation, the kind that feels like a question that will never be answered. The floor beneath me pulsed once, slow and deep, and I realized it was not stone at all. It was flesh turned to memory. I climbed the stairs in darkness. The air above was still. The camp was gone. Every tent, every footprint erased. The desert stretched unbroken in every direction, smooth as water. At the horizon, light flickered. Not the sun, not the moon, but something older. It spread across the sky like veins beneath skin, slow and deliberate. The hum returned, faint but certain, rising again from the earth. I looked down at my hands. The glow from the box lingered there, faint lines under the skin, pulsing to the rhythm of the sound below. Each beat answered my heart, and for the first time, I could not tell which belonged to me. They told me I was the only one who came back. I'm not sure what that means anymore. Back from where? From the desert? From the light? From whatever was breathing under the earth, the report said the site collapsed. A sinkhole, they called it. An accident. The sand swallowed the entire excavation, every tent, every name. But the ground does not forget. It only waits. I woke up in a white room, the kind that hums softly like a throat before it speaks. No window, no sound, only a light that never changes. They said it was the Vatican that found me. A team pulled me from the wreckage 3 days after the storm. 3 days. I do not remember them. Only the hum. There was a priest in the room with me when I opened my eyes. Older, dressed in black. He smiled without warmth and said, "You were never there." Then he left and the lights dimmed. They kept me under observation. They asked about Connor, about Grace, about what we found. I told them nothing, not because I refused, but because I could not. Every time I tried to describe it, the words turned to dust in my mouth. When they finally released me, they gave me a single object sealed in plastic. The box, the same one that had been broken open in the chamber. They said it was found beside me, untouched. They called it evidence. To me, it looked alive. I keep it here on the table. Sometimes it trembles when I speak. Sometimes it hums, always in rhythm with my pulse. I've tried to destroy it. I burned it once. It stayed cold. I buried it in salt. It found its way back, waiting on the floor beside my bed, clean of sand, edges perfect. I do not dream anymore, not like before. Now I see shapes in the dark behind my eyes, wings folded inward, eyes turning without light. They do not speak. They only wait, as if listening. At night, I hear them moving under the walls, not feet, not claws, something older. The same movement I felt beneath the desert, slow and endless. It reminds me that the ground is never still. I've started writing again, not for them, but for whoever comes after. If anyone finds this, if the words remain when the light goes out, know this: what we uncovered was not history. It was memory. Older than the church, older than God. Connor once said the Vatican feared not the devil, but the origin of divinity itself. He was right. They called it faith. It was never faith. It was inheritance. The box sits open now. There is no light inside, only reflection, as if it holds a mirror to the dark. When I lean close, I see movement. Not my face, not even a shadow, something deeper. Sometimes I think it watches me back. Sometimes I think it breathes. I've kept it sealed since that night, but lately the air around it feels different, warm, alive, like the moment before thunder. I do not know if I will send this record. Maybe it will vanish like everything else. Maybe it will reach someone who still believes in the difference between heaven and earth. If you hear the hum, do not follow it. If you find the box, do not open it. If you see the light, do not pray. Because prayer is how it finds you. The walls are trembling again. The hum is closer now, just beneath the floor. It sounds like breathing. I am going to set the recorder beside the box. If you are listening to this, remember, God from the archive was never an artifact, it was a door.